welcome everyone. Let me introduce you to our panel. You'll have probably read a little bit about them on the pre-event document, but let me first introduce Steve Sullivan. Hi, Steve. Steve's going to be looking after us from sort of contact center ops and through his work with the DMA from a data protection standpoint. Next on our list, in our panel, is Brent Agar. Brent's joining us from the US. Good morning, Brent.
Hey, good morning, and it is morning.
7 o'clock. Thanks for the effort. And Brent's going to be looking after us from a technology standpoint. Next is Simon. Morning, Simon.
Morning there. Thanks for the invite, John.
You're very welcome. Great to see you. And Simon's going to be looking after us from a security angle, but on top of that, really from a payments compliance standpoint. Simon's a specialist QSA, and will be able to look after us from that point of view. And last but by no means least, Felix. Good morning, Felix.
Morning, John. Morning, everybody.
Great to see you. And Felix is going to be looking after us from a risk standpoint, really going to highlight to us what's going to bite us perhaps in our rears. Okay, so let's start the session off by looking at the question of home working itself. And what's the upside? Steve, give us a quick heads up on the upside of home working and why it's good for us.
Well, yeah, there's lots of organisations are leaping onto the fact that it obviously reduces costs potentially, particularly if you have a clear view as to what life will look like post-COVID. We appear to be getting improved employee satisfaction, so happier staff, happier agents. Obviously, as this goes on, access to a much wider pool of potential employees. People are also getting increased retention, but of course you might have diminished retention if everybody else has access to a better set of employers. So possibly it raises the bar there. And most organisations that we're in touch with have said that they've overall seen improved CSAT and improved performance and productivity. But I think we have to say it's a mixed bag, and to some extent the jury's still out, but lots of definite benefits.
It's interesting. Brent, you've seen organizations outsource, and we're now, to an extent, home working's been forced upon us, COVID, etc. But what have you seen as the big considerations from a tech point of view?
Well, I think the big change is that, I'll give you an example of a large insurance company. They've gone from 200 endpoints, which is offices, to 120,000. So, basically that's all their employees working from home. They have nobody in any of their offices across the country. So that causes some major challenges around technology of protecting those, what we call unmanaged endpoints, and they're not inside the infrastructure of the organization.
Yeah, Simon, you must have seen a lot of BT's workers, but also some of your clients having to consider home working and managing the third parties. What's it been like from your point of view?
Yeah, so we've seen the same. Brent said, we've gone, so BT, we do allow home working in the contact center space. Obviously, generally team leaders levels, not necessarily the agents on the phones day in, day out, but we've seen a mass migration to working from home. So we've had a technical challenge ourselves to enabling our agents to be able to remote work from home. And I guess it's making those decisions around expanding our scope and the risk around systems and processing, but also where we engage with third parties who are service providers for us. BT, we are the merchant, so it is on us to ensure compliance. We can't outsource that. So where we've engaged, we have looked to technology to obviously securely move the ability for an agent to work from home in that secure environment, where at BT we have lots of, we have 150 contact centers across the globe and they're all physically secure. So you think we've got to move people home. We've gone from moving from a physical security perspective to moving to an endpoint technology perspective, and we've had to decide what to do there. Now we've opted for giving our employees machines to take home so we can control the endpoints. But that has been one of the biggest considerations and where a lot of the effort's gone in. And maybe sometimes the risk assessment and the review on PCI scope, or payment scope, isn't always there at the forefront. It's more a business enabler to make sure we can get people working from home to meet the strict government requirements or restrictions.
Yeah, and I think we've all been given guidance as both as consumers and as business people on how to look after folks at home. But Felix, just give us in a nutshell, give us what exposure are we putting ourselves under by pushing our people out into the home working environment?
This is the difficult thing to judge at the moment, because we're in this sort of blitz spirit situation where we've had to do it, and people are prepared to put up with it in terms of certain of the big players are prepared to put up with it and wait and see. So you'll see the insurance industry, for example, fundamentally waiting to see until it's got some form of an idea of what's happening in terms of risk before it starts to do anything with policies. You've got the government looking at the health and safety rules and fundamentally saying we're going to bring out new stuff, but we haven't done it yet. You've got the unions and the lawyers, who are the people who are going to ultimately be involved in this in terms of cases, who know they can't do anything yet, because if you brought something in front of a judge at the moment, that no one would look very bad, basically, because we are in this, we've all got to be in it together mode later on.
It's a question of very much a question, I guess, of best endeavors at the moment, and to get from your point, Steve, making the most of what we've got as a situation, seeing the upside of it. But to your point, Simon, and your point, Brent, how do we make sure that we've got a secure environment? And securing the endpoint is a key part of that, particularly, I guess, for organizations that aren't able to immediately equip employees with all the hardware necessary for secure access to core business applications, payments being one. Brent, I'd like just to expand a little more about your US client, your US insurance client, and what we did there, because I think we've got a short video we can share with our audience as well, can't we?
Yes, well, I can give you two quick examples. We have one of the leading insurance companies who have independent agents working from home now. They, as you allude to there, John, their options are $1,000 laptops, or they can put in some software it's marginally, it's obviously a lot cheaper. And the difficulty with giving out corporate laptops to a BYOD audience or someone working from home, you've got to have a whole support mechanism around that. You've got to distribute them. You've got to provide support, etc. When someone uses their own machine, that onus on the maintenance of that machine is really the employee, not the corporation. So one of their big risk factors is actually, we talk about protecting data when it's at rest by encryption or when it's transmitted, but the companies forget that when you actually enter in the data or actually view it, there's a risk for malware at that point, which the PCI auditors have identified and pushing. We have a large one, I think it's the second largest call center in the US using our software. And this was a PCI compliance. They were urgent to get it out with their employees working from home to protect that gap that traditional antivirus will not protect you for.
No, great point. Simon, this must be an area you're looking after. What are the PCI obligations we've got just with employees working from home and security?
Yes, so this is where the PCI obviously doesn't prevent you from working from home, but what it does make clear is that this would be classed as a significant change to the environment. So obviously there's a whole process around what you need to do in order to ensure your scope. Now, let's remember that the merchant is ultimately responsible for the scope of their assessment, but then there should be an open communication with their acquiring bank as well, because at the end of the day, the standards don't govern the compliance, they govern the standard as it was, and the acquirers govern the compliance side. So, the first thing should be to reach out to their acquirers and communicate what they've got to do, and obviously articulate what the plan is. So standard is to do your privacy impact assessment, to engage key stakeholders, work out what it is, what is the ask, what capabilities have we got, to Brent's point, do we have 100,000 machines to give to our employees to send out? And if we don't, then do we allow them to use their own machines? And if they do use their own machines, then obviously, like the ICO point out that you are allowed to work from home, but consider that if you do work from home, and you're using your endpoint's own technology, so bring your own device as it was, then there are certain elements you should be considerate of. So patching, sharing of machines, exfiltration of data, etc., etc. So the standard just classes this as a significant change, and then to ensure that you've covered all the areas and all the controls. At BT, we've gone through a whole process of that, and again, it's not a one-time process either. It's an iterative thing. So it's BAU, business as usual, continually reassessing and ensuring that the controls that you've got in place are actually working. And one of the things we do here is we've got, the compliance but verify. So, trust but verify. So, a certain allowance of trust with our agents at home because they're not in that secure environment with the team leaders, reviewing what they're up to, but then also having an effective compliance program to track and monitor what they're doing. Now, that might be engagement with the team leaders over video calls. It might be using technologies such as Brent's alluded to, where we're tracking exfiltration, security, etc. I mean, one of the biggest things I'm seeing when, especially with engaging with third party, because we rely on third party contact centers as well, is having to do significant uplift for multi-factor authentication, and when we're looking at contracts and legals, which I get involved in as well, is making sure that our agreements with our partners are nailed down to the fact that they will use multi-factor rather than two-factor, because we're aware the definitions have changed with the PCI standards, because two thumbprints don't make a multi-factor, do they? There might be a two-factor, but we've got to consider the change of the standard. So overall, there is quite a lot to consider, but I guess the key item I would highlight to the merchants is to engage with their acquirers and keep them abreast at all times as to the progress we're making, and then that continual cycle internally for review of compliance and the technologies and the people, because of course don't forget the people. Everybody goes on about the technology, but the people are in scope as well.
Well, let's have a look. I think we've got a short video, JB, that we can share with our audience now, and this is going to look at technology that you've deployed, Brent, supporting clients' endpoints. So let's have a look at that.
And welcome. Thank you so much for joining us on this video demonstration. Today we're going to be showing how some very simple software can help you achieve your PCI compliance by mitigating key logging and screen capture. So without further ado, let's jump straight in. So our first job will be to enable our visual representation of a keylogger and a screen capture tool. And then we're going to log into our Office 365 portal and load our Dynamics 365 CRM. So in this example, you can see already in our keylogger in the bottom left-hand corner of the screen, our credentials have been stolen. We have username and password. So as you can see, we are logging into our Dynamics Office 365. We're going to create a new customer and enter some personal information. So let's just zip through this. Now, can see that we've got keystrokes have been exfiltrated. And now we can see us signing into Office 365 with our screen capture tool and entering our personal information. This is a really easy attack vector, and it may be something that's not just utilized by a malicious actor, it could be the employee. So here we're going to enable a simple piece of software. It's called the Armored Client. And what it does is scrambles keystrokes and prevents screen capture. So again, going to enable our visual keylogger and our screen capture tool. So opening our browser and logging into Office 365, we can see that the keyboard scrambler in the browser is showing our scrambled keys, and our keylogger is reflecting that information. We can already see that our credentials have been protected, they're safe, and let's log into Dynamics. And again, we can go and create our customer, and we can enter that personal information. So we're going to zip through this again. And as you can see in the bottom left-hand corner, the keylogger has been defeated. So we haven't got credentials, we haven't got keystrokes of personal information. And let's go and check our screen capture tool. And as you can see, there has been no screen captures. The software prevents screen capture from taking place on protected applications, but allowing the desktop to still be viewed. This is especially useful in this day and age when we're using screen shares with video conferencing systems such as Teams, Zoom, so on and so forth. Thank you so much for your time, everybody. If you do have any questions or would like to learn more about the advanced features, please do get in touch.
Thanks for that, JB. Brent, just give us a quick summary of what we've seen there.
Yes, so I suppose the fundamental difference with Sentry Bay and traditional antivirus is traditional antivirus has always been signature based, so it's looking for malware, and the sort of success rates over the years on traditional antivirus has dropped and dropped, and just because the criminals are getting smarter using hybrid forms of malware which the antivirus hasn't seen. We've taken a different approach. We actually block the ability for the personal information to be taken. So as you can see, the keylogger actually gets false data, and they think they've got your keystrokes, but they haven't. It's the same with the screen capture. We stop the ability for the remote software to steal the information using the device to do that. So it's a fundamentally different way of doing it.
And how many endpoints did you recently deploy in the US?
Well, around the world, we've got millions. We have 2 of the top banks in the world using it, a number of the large insurance companies, the actual US government. So this technology has been, obviously put through its paces. And obviously major penetration testing, etc.
Yeah. So thanks for that. I just want to come back now to data protection, because we know that with PCI, we're into penalties from the card schemes that are passed down to the acquirers, that then are passed down to the merchants. But data protection, we know, is a bit more heavy-handed. Steve, give us a view, particularly the Direct Marketing Association. What's the advice to merchants on data protection when working from home?
Well, I mean, just for starters, it's interesting that the ICO can often be a bit opaque when it comes to detail. But one of the things that's been very clear and explicit about is that if you're not PCI compliant, they regard that as a kind of, an entry into being not data secure with people's personal data. So it's unusual that they acknowledge what goes on in the rest of the world. And when we're talking about sort of contact centers and people working from home, all these worlds collide. And I think Simon made a good point there that it's not just an InfoSec issue. It's not just a payments issue. It's not just a data security, data privacy issue. All these things coalesce. So I think really the DMA hasn't specifically come up with some sort of rules about doing things differently or guidance about doing things differently. when you've got this distributed workforce. But I think some of the core principles apply, and that is really being systemic in terms of how you look at data privacy and data protection. It doesn't work as a sticking plaster, and we are all working to best endeavours. But I think perhaps sometimes I look at this world as being, there's three players: there's regulators, there's stakeholders, which is your staff, it's your investors, it's your clients, it's your suppliers, and it's your consumers. And when the COVID period first started, I sort of described the regulators as being like sleeping lions, because they all backed off and said, we're not going to make the life difficult for people. We know this is a challenge. They're not going to do that forever. The ICO in particular is gunning for people it thinks are being exploitative through COVID, particularly in terms of their marketing practices. But I think, just generally, there's a duty of care, and part of the duty of care towards frontline staff is not making them exposed. So 20 years ago, I was working for a bank, and insufficiently quickly, but we copped onto the fact that it wasn't acceptable to have quite a secure working environment. But then when people walked across the road to the car park, they could have somebody pull a knife on them and ask for details about bank customers' data and information. And I think similarly, we've got a duty of care towards the people who we have sent home, and some of them are quite happy to be at home and some of them aren't happy to be at home. And in the same way that 2 years ago, the way to get ready for GDPR wasn't try and expect your frontline agent to become an expert on the 2018 Data Protection Act. That's not going to help drive a good, positive customer experience. Likewise, the less people have to worry about how they handle data, potential exposure, be that inadvertent or, even for some people, the lure of fraudulent activity, the less there is, the less exposure, the less temptation, then the better it is, and the more people can do the positive things that they enjoy about their jobs.
Yeah, it's a very good point. But you mentioned the sleeping lions, right? Felix, what's the claims industry doing? Are they a sleeping lion that we should be worried about?
Undeniably. I mean, I'm picking up stuff now. There was an interesting article from the Accident Helpline who are super aggressive, basically, saying that they're already starting to the article, like 17 ways you can get, you can hurt yourself working from home, and basically, if you're putting an employee into a situation where they are at risk, whether they're at risk of inadvertently breaking the law, or in risk of becoming unwell in one way or another, or being discriminated against, all the things that we have to deal with in this new world, then the claims businesses will be looking at it really carefully. They know they can't move yet because, like I say, they would be seen to, they would be very looked down upon by a judge in that situation. But as soon as we get one thing going through, and it won't happen, I don't think, necessarily in the private sector. I think it'll happen in the government sector first of all. So as the government unions are very strong, they've got big lawyers playing for them. You look at situations where the Welsh government, for example, 1/3 of workers now, have said they can work from home. It's a huge group of people. So I think you'll see it coming out. So I think we're in the right time now to be planning and putting stuff in. And to a certain extent, sort of double guessing where legislation is going to go. That's my position at the moment. But you'll see the claims come out in the next sort of 6 months or so.
Interesting. JB, we had a survey pop up then. Have we got the results of that to share?
So currently the poll says, so we've got 3 questions. First was, what percentage of the contact centre workers, what percentage of your contact centre workers are currently working from home? So it's a mixed results really. We've got 75%. So most, as you'd expect, are working from home currently. Then with 18% between 51 and 75% of workers working from home, and then 17 between 26 and 50. And for the second question, we asked about what percentage of your staff use their own devices to access your systems. So we've got 54% said 0%, and 46% have gone between 1 and 25%. And the third question was, does your business have a post-lockdown staff location strategy? So we've got 54% coming in as yes and 46 as no. Just actually, whilst we're on the polls, if anybody has any questions, please ask them on the Q&A, and the panelists will to respond.
No, thanks for that, JP, and please do come forward with your questions whilst we've got the panel. I've got one myself. Interesting on that split, isn't it, that about half of our audience have taken the steps to provide technology at home and half haven't. Brent, what's what sort of size of organization should be considering endpoint software? Is it just the big guys, or should this be something that everybody's considering and has access to?
Yes, I mean, it's across the board. I mean, the rules don't change because of the size of the business. I mean, if you need to be compliance taking a certain type of data, it applies to everybody. I would probably say that we've seen in the banking area, it tends to be the big guys that have gone first, which, banks tend to buy what other banks buy. So they're the ones that do the due diligence, and then we see the smaller banks following their leads.
Yeah, and from your point of view, Simon, do organizations, because they're smaller and haven't got so many home workers, are they any less exposed to the security measures that the PCI standard requires?
Oh no, everybody's equally responsible and required to meet the PCI obligations. I mean, I work with a lot of third parties and refer on, help out on a lot of bid work within BT to ensure that anything we're bidding on is compliance. And obviously, we're seeing multiple solutions in place. Like Brent's solution, for example, where we're doing all the endpoint protection, where some of the smaller organizations may not necessarily have those elements or are focusing just purely on the multi-factor authentication. So there is a vast array of different solutions, but no, ultimately the standard is appropriate to all organizations, no matter what the size is. What we tend to find, though, is the larger organizations have more of a budget for and current capability for endpoint protection, whereas maybe some of the small contact centers, for example, are going cloud-based. So I guess the question in ultimately, is the endpoint protection on a small organization whose cloud-based solution is equal? Well, yes, it would be. Different, I guess, risk of information on the local machines. Can you control a cloud platform? Well, no. It's a similar scenario whether you're on-prem or off-prem. We need that endpoint protection. What I am seeing a lot of organizations do, though, is to obviously try and devalue the data in their organizations. And by devaluing, I mean, going for a DTMF solution, for example, where, the agents don't have access to the customers giving them the credit card information. And I'm seeing a trend to people thinking that by outsourcing to these DTMF providers that they've got no PCI obligations. So really, it's just a reminder, even if a merchant outsources their PCI compliance to a third-party service provider, then, the merchant is still ultimately responsible for the end-to-end compliance. All that removing the scope or outsourcing the scope does is reduce the number of controls that are applicable to your assessment. So if you're using a cloud hosted provider, then they've got to be compliant for the service they've provided. So it's not outsourced to the third party. You are still liable, and that's where you need to use your security professionals and QSAs to understand the scope and the remit of the controls. But even for, within BT, we've deployed our DTMF solution to 22,000 agents we've currently got operating on that with our outsourcers as well. And I'm, like Brent, I deal with a lot of large insurance brokers, and they're also looking to outsource all the DTMF solutions. So my job really is just collecting the AOCs for the merchants to demonstrate how all the third parties are covering the PCI elements. And the devil's in the detail as to which PCI requirement is covered by which third parties. So, there's definitely that requirement for, endpoint protection. Well, it's the whole solution, is it? It's that whole scoping exercise that we engage with as QSAs.
Yeah, no, thanks for that, Simon. And I want to come back to payments again later, but first we've got a question from the audience. This is to all the panel, right? Has the industry, and I think the contact center industry, seen an increase in breaches over the last 12 months? And I thought I'd share with you first some feedback I was getting from the card schemes last week. This is from MasterCard. John Elliott at MasterCard was telling us that they've seen a 400% increase in moto fraud over the last 12 months. Is this a picture that you're seeing? Probably, Brent, you first, if you can come back to us on that one.
Yes, yeah, I'm speaking from the US side. Century Bay is actually headquartered in London, so we have a whole London European team. Yeah, we're seeing they look for the weakest link typically in malware, or the other term they use is they follow the money, and we're seeing much more of a penetration into these home devices and people working from home and different phishing campaigns, etc.
Steve, what have you been seeing from the sort of call center ops side in terms of increased risk and any increase in breaches?
Well, I think Brent's description's spot on, and that's an amazing figure, that 400% increase in moto fraud. I mean, typically in terms of when things get reported formally and officially through to the ICO, if they reach the criteria for that to happen, it does tend to be a dragging indicator. It's not a leading indicator. So yet to be seen. Instinctively, I'm certain breaches have increased. I think the other point is that if you've got a newly distributed workforce, you probably don't have the infrastructure to as well as securely identify when you've got a breach as you did before. And of course, most organizations are notoriously poor at identifying breaches. It's often customers, it's third parties, it's tech providers trying to sell them technology solutions will alert them to the fact that they have, I think in the Virgin Media's case, literally their large part of their customer database for sale on the dark web with a price tag hanging off it. So it's not officially coming through, but I'm sure it's happening. And we have, of course, seen these aren't COVID era, these predate COVID era, but two really substantial fines go through on the back of data breaches for Marriott and British Airways for BA, not as big as the ICO originally suggested. And I think their respective corporate legal teams brought the fines down, but 18 and 20 million pounds is a lot of money. And back to Felix's point about the claims industry, there are private equity funded legal entities who are specifically targeting consumers who've been the victims of large scale data breaches. So I think it's still to be proven, and Felix will know more about this than me, but the people targeting BA subsequent to that fine being paid are gunning really hard and acquiring lots of sign-ups for people who have or claim to have had been damaged by that data breach. Yeah,
no, that's a good point. The other point, Simon, you've got a vast estate to look after with BT. What feedback are you getting on breaches or notifications?
So, I mean, I can't comment on the whole business as a whole, but what I'm beginning through the PCI incidents that come through my way, we're seeing a lot more incidents of phishing and people hacking, as it was, through the contact center. So agents being called up and put in those situations where they're trying to expose data more from that point rather than an infrastructure point of view, because we've with the DTMF products, obviously we've taken our payment data away from the agents, and we also use the pay by link route as well. Originally, to begin with, in lockdown, it was put the customer back to the call centers away from the home workers, where we've got more controls in place. But we are now, with the deployment of technology, being able to use the DTMF and the payment link. So more social engineering attacks and from that point of view, but I can't comment as a whole on fraud. I'm not aware of any noise from our position on that.
Okay, one thing I can share with the audience, reading the Poneman report, I think for the UK, it takes an average UK organisation 8 months to find a data breach. Yeah, 8 months to find a data breach. And I think JB in the packs that we'll send out afterwards will include some of that data, just because I don't think we're beginning to see the very beginning of the data breaches, even from, when we went through last March. Those are only beginning to come through before even they get reported. So I think in answer to your question, Kevin, we're going to see more, and to the points raised by the panel, we're going to see more over the next 6 months on that. Got another question here. This is about payments at home and securing the end environment. It's okay securing the endpoint from a data input point of view, but of course it's spoken payment card data that's bringing our home workers into scope, isn't it, Simon?
Yes, it is. So of course the call recording scenario, so just a reminder to everybody that, pause and resume in your recordings obviously doesn't remove PCI from your contact center scope. All it does is remove the security of the recorded payment, so requirement 3. And then obviously with a lot of contact centers now going more IP based or cloud based, then obviously the standard is very clear that the transmission of cardholder data in the VoIP traffic is in scope as well. So again, this is where we're seeing a lot of organizations trying to secure the communication between the endpoints by providing corporate devices, or this is where we're seeing a huge uptake now in alternative technologies so taking the payment data away from the agent from home, therefore reducing the risk, and in some cases enabling end-to-end recordings, because obviously we don't need to worry about pause and resume. And technology again, so this is two-prong attack. First, it's training of the people, so ensure that they know how to use the technology, the scripts that our agents are using, make sure it's clear that for example in chat we're asking for the last 4, not for the credit card number, to confirm the data. And then finally, the technology and doing checks. One of the things that we do is we correlate our payments taken in the back-end databases. So we look where we've received a payment for a product and we don't see we see a manual payment. So obviously, internally we would class that potentially as whether don't you call it a data breach, but it's a breach in process. And what we're finding is the majority of the time is that's down to technology rather than agent behavior. So I think the trend with a lot of organizations recently is to remove the payment data, because I think it was Steve who said, GDPR does say you need to protect the information you're processing, the standard applicable, and that is PCI. So obviously if you're not protecting your payment data and PCI compliant, then in theory you're in breach of that.
No, thanks.
So hopefully that gives you a bit of a guide there.
Yeah, we've got quite a long question that I think will from Leonard. Thank you for that question, Leonard. What we'll do is reply to that. It's quite a complex one. Hopefully you've had some feedback from our audience, but I know we've got just a few minutes left now. It'd be great to. So how long have we got left, JB?
We've got 5 minutes left. Just going back to Leonard, actually, if we can't answer on this call, we'll come back to you and after the session with a response. Just make sure
No, that's
your question.
That's right. So I just wanted to pick up on just finalize on the payments piece. The document that Simon was referring to, which has got 15 mentions of home working in it, is the current information supplement that you can find on the PCI Council website. I think we'll send a link over as part of our pack. But also there are, as well as 15 mentions of home working, there's a classification of technologies that prevent spoken card data entering the environment. So we've got 2 angles. First of all, Brent's point that we saw the demo about is securing the endpoint. We've then got the point of preventing card data entering the environment. Simon's point in using different technologies for that. We've got Felix's point really about a whole industry, a whole claims industry just waiting to pounce, the sleeping lion, and Steve's point about, hey, look, we've still got to look after our people. So I think in summary, thank you very much to our panel for that. Any final points? Just a quick sentence from you, Brent.
You got me caught a little bit. One of the other areas which I didn't mention was, what we do with our product also is we ensure by certificates on either end that the actual technology is running. So it's all in well to have technology, but if you can't prove to the auditors that when the call center employee is actually doing what they do, that they are being protected. The other important thing, especially here in the US, is around privacy. So we only run our technology when they're using the corporate tools. So obviously in home machines, people have their own lives and use their browsers in different ways. So there's a real thing about intrusion into privacy of someone using their own machine as well.
No, good. Simon, just a last sentence.
Last sentence, just in Leonard's question. Obviously, we BT have a huge estate offshore, and they are all working from home. And again, we've deployed technology. I know not everyone's going to be able to do that, but all I can say is we do have an internal dedicated assurance team which are looking after the working from home agents, and we have seen no significant increase in fraud related to offshore in the office or working from home, which is good. So obviously, we trust our employees to a set level, but there is an element of monitoring their activity. And I think the biggest challenge, to be honest, is monitoring. So using both technology and people management to monitor that. So I'll just finish that off my closing note.
No, thank you. Steve, just a closing piece.
Well, two things very quickly. I think Leonard highlights, and Simon's got some good points there, but from a vendor management perspective, COVID creates some massive issues. And I know we've seen things like, legislation have to change in India to catch up with the reality of people trying to work from home. And it's had a massive impact, which I think has been largely hidden, iceberg-like. But I think if you're in a role where you're managing global vendors, it's a big challenge. And very quickly, I just think there's a lot of angry, frustrated consumers out there. None of us in the UK are enjoying lockdown 2 or 3 or whatever this is. So anything that we can do to make our agents' lives easier and let them focus on what they're best at is to everybody's benefit.
Yeah, thank you. Felix, things to look out for?
Well, I think the move to home working is inevitable, simply because the cost savings are so substantial. And in a competitive environment, that's going to happen. There are risks. The risks are undeniably manageable. The difficulty at the moment is we're looking through smoke glass, so we can't see things. But I think there's enough we can do as professionals to protect our customers. But the genie's out the bottle now. What's it called? If your competitor has got a lower cost base than you have, then you're out of business. So that's what's going to happen, basically.
No, thanks for that. JB, thank you for setting it all up. Over to you to finish off.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks to all the panelists today and everybody else who's listened in. This is the first of, as I said at the beginning, of 3 webinars within the series. The next one will focus on home working health and safety considerations and legal risks. And then we're going to follow up with a home working wellbeing webinar as well. So if you've enjoyed today, please sign up to that one or those 2. There's a short survey after this webinar as well. If you could provide your feedback, it's always welcome. So that'd be it. That'd be great. And we'll also be following this webinar with some details, access to a recording if you want to listen back, and some further information, as John has alluded to. But thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you, everyone. Keep safe.
You're on. Bye.